Welcome to Babblecom 5. This is episode 13 of season 5 of Babylon 5. The core is mother, the core is father, but you knew I was going to say that. We open on what turns out to be a Psy-Corps building. Lauren and Chen are introduced to Al, Bester. He apologises for his late arrival, he was having a problem elsewhere. These, it seems, are star pupils wishing to get involved on P12 investigations, and Bester has been assigned to introduce them to the world of Psychops. Lauren's eagerness pleases him, and he happily takes on the assignment, noting to his superior that he'll have his report on Babylon 5 shortly. Chen would like to see a copy of it if it's not classified, noting that they seem to have made it an inhospitable place for telepaths. Bester agrees, noting that B5 seems to think it's the centre of the universe. The irony being that he might have to visit soon, because a babbling telepath seems to be headed there, having apparently attacked another. The students enter a room where two Psychops sit opposite one another, not acknowledging their presence. Bester says they're trained to ignore distractions. You could bring a brass band in and they wouldn't notice. They're practicing blocking and attacking. 5 minutes, then switch roles. Ultimately, the aim is to get them to defend for a solid hour, because no human telepath can sustain a deep scan for more than 45 minutes without suffering brain injuries. Lauren and Chen observe the process with their senses, Chen noting it's horrible. Bester explains it's necessary to protect them in the field. Being a P12 isn't enough, it takes a certain kind of person to be a Psychop. Chen suggests they have to be ruthless, but Bester says only as a last resort. Rogues may have lost their way, but they're still family, ultimately. Chen thinks they don't want saving, and aren't grateful for it, but Bester counters this suggestion by starting a program running hosted by a reformed Blip who has returned to the fold. He mentions 42.5% of Blip's suicide having left the Corps, apparently. The show and tell is cut short as a female Psychop comes in to speak with Bester. He and his students attend the crime scene we saw earlier, the deceased telepath having been a student of Bester's. The suspect is a P10, his roommate. While odd behaviour had been noted, this was chalked up to training. Bester is given the case, and he takes a moment to comfort the dead telepath's partner who found the body. The campus will be shut down, but they think it'll be too late. Lauren comes to see a dressed-down Bester when everyone else is attending a concert. The sight of a dead body has disturbed her. Bester says it bothers him less when it's a mundane, which he notes they hate to hear him say, but they kill each other with such efficiency it's hardly surprising. He notes it's harder with rogues because they're still special like them and rare. He notes that he was orphaned in an accident and picked up on a genetic scan in his foster home, so for him the Corps became mother and father in a very real sense. There's a brief mention of Bester's wife being at Syria Planum, Lauren saying that must be nice. Bester's following joke goes over her head, but ironically we get it because he's referring to his Blip lover being his true love. Possibly because of this joke, Lauren coyly propositions him. He politely declines and reassures her not to worry about it. It's a curious exchange in a way, but he lets her down very softly. Just after he's closed the door on her, there's another knock, but she hasn't returned. It's his boss with news. The suspect bought a ticket to his favourite place in the universe, Babylon 5. In a full mission briefing, the suspect is named as a Jonathan Harris, who is a strong P10. He's low on funds, so he may well be headed to the station rather than anywhere else, and could become stuck there until he can raise funds. Bester's team will go there on the assumption that's what he's committed to, whilst the rest run background checks for other possibilities. Chen asks why they can't advise the transport to secure him, but Bester's boss points out that an untrained security team could simply be brainwashed into thinking he wasn't there by any number of means. In any event, Bester notes that this is core business, a family matter, and his boss backs him. The mundanes leave them alone in no small part because they stay out of the press, so conventional means are avoided whenever possible. As the group moves off, Al is called back, to be warned his suspect is also trained in attack probes. He's a mind shredder. If he gets close enough, he could destroy a fellow telepath's mind. Bester seems to be trying to make some sort of connection with Harris, trying to understand him. He appears in a mirror Bester touches with his ungloved hand, saying he knows something went wrong, but he'll never know what. Chen interrupts his efforts to tell him it's time to leave, and Bester seems momentarily disoriented. He says he'll be right out, and the scene shifts to the station. The rogue Cyclops has decided to chance his hand in what looks to be a brown sector casino. He asks to be told the rules of the game. Meanwhile, Bester's team is in a shuttle ready to launch out from what they call the mothership, which apparently never leaves hyperspace except for repairs in order to keep its existence concealed, just like the others. As they come into normal space, their ex-colleague pockets his winnings and leaves the table, but his activities haven't escaped notice. They're greeted on arrival by Zack, less than warmly of course after the Byron affair, whilst Bester shoots a joke to Lauren which makes Zack wonder what he's missed. They take their leave having duly checked in. One of the Cyclops' gambling partners is not impressed by his winning streak and pushes him to the ground in an isolated spot, which seems to trigger some reaction that suggests he's unstable, and he launches a ferocious psionic attack on his assailant, causing his eyes to redden before he drops to the ground. Unobserved, a second man, who noted his winning streak, looks at the body, then moves away. Bester pays off Adrazi Fence, who's had contact with Harris, but tries to stiff Bester, which of course doesn't work because Bester knows which location he was actually thinking of. He tells Chen and Lauren not to engage Harris whilst he calls in station security to open the room. Chen promptly uses a piece of homemade kit over Lauren's objection to try and steal the arrest, and ends up lying on the floor screaming, not because he was attacked, but because he tripped over a dead body. Smooth. Zack says the first dead body is a record even for Bester, but the victim was actually killed by Harris a couple of days ago. Zack notes that his identicard has been used since, however, to support winning streaks on blackjack at the casino. Lauren is puzzled because Psy-Corps don't allow gambling, and Psi talents alone wouldn't be enough to cheat. Bester reasons that Harris took the knowledge from the victim's mind because he wanted to make the money to escape. Just then, Zack tells him another body has been found. Franklin reports to them that the victim was killed from the inside out, brain cells burst apart. Nothing to suggest a natural cause. Bester discounts this, saying only a P-12 could do that sort of damage, and Psy-Corps doesn't make mistakes when it comes to grading its telepaths. Whilst he doesn't let on to Franklin, outside with the students he's concerned, but he doesn't want to say anything more until he has something more concrete. He dispatches Chen to keep an eye on casinos, while Lauren gets all the background information from the academy. He'll check for any ticket purchases at customs. Chen sticks out like a sore thumb in the gambling den's bar, but does identify Harris. This time he doesn't try heroics, but as he locates a Babcom unit and puts in a request to contact Bester, he is turned round and stabbed in the chest by the man who observed the earlier confrontation, who it turns out is actually Harris's accomplice, helping him to accumulate for them both wealth for their own reasons. Zack doesn't have much to go on, but the Babcom unit did record a little of what happened visually, and Bester can tell that the perp's skin colour is wrong for Harris. There's a tattoo Zack can look at on the attacker's hand. Bester is dismissive of Zack's condolences, saying he doesn't want to drown in crocodile tears. Back in their quarters, Bester is going over Harris's personal effects, seeing different names and handwriting, when Lauren comes up with a video of an out-of-hours sparring session that Bester seizes on, noting that Harris uses the term he said rather than I said in an argument. This leads Bester to his realisation that the different names and handwriting aren't from multiple people, but the same person, meaning Harris has multiple personalities that were triggered by the sparring session, causing one of them to kill his roommate, because as Lauren notes, Psy-Corps would lock him away for the good of the Corps. This also means that one of his personalities could be a P-12, as the second victim's injuries suggested, in the same way that one personality could be an artist, while another couldn't draw a straight line. It's a very rare occurrence, but he has seen it before, and Bester has her check for entry under his other names. Shortly afterwards, a firefight ensues between Harris and his accomplice with security, the latter taking a hit as Bester tries to talk Harris down. He puts himself between Lauren and a PPG shot as a more passive personality takes control over Harris and brings the confrontation to an end. Bester urges the security team not to hurt Harris as he holds his wounded shoulder. In MedLab, Franklin tries to convince Bester that his dislike for him stems from his personality rather than his telepath status, Bester noting that he'd forgotten what an optimist looks like when Franklin suggests they don't have to be anti one another. Franklin even offers to let Bester scan him when he tries to stop him falling, but at that point Lauren arrives to confirm they've been given custody, noting that Zack said out loud he'd be glad to see them go because he doesn't like telepaths. Bester declares game, set and match to Franklin and utters his "be seeing you" catchphrase as they head for their shuttle where the sedated prisoners await. As they head back to their mothership, Bester is going to be glad to get back and Lauren offers him a back rub. She's persistent. She rather more perversely then offers to deal with the mundane, which she does by spacing him. She confirms that's her first, and Bester says she might yet make it as a Psychop as they continue on. So a very interesting episode that very unusually doesn't have anyone based on Babylon 5 as its focus. We've had a Lower Decks style show before, but to focus so completely on the Psy-Corps like this is something else again. Lots of really interesting little background points I picked up on. To start with, it's unclear where the Psy-Corps campus is. It seems to be under a dome, which probably means it's on Mars, because it would make sense for Bester's wife to then be living in Syria Planum. This must also mean that Bester racks up a lot of space miles over the course of his career. Speaking of which, I feel as if we've seen a Psy-Corps mothership, possibly intentionally named as a play on the Corps' mother, before now, but I can't for the life of me think why. It may have been a fan video actually based on this episode, suggesting a ship like an Asimov liner is used as a carrier and mobile base for Corps operations. Bester also very clearly suggests that this fleet is clandestine and contains more than just a single mothership. So that's quite a significant piece of information we didn't have before about the level of Psy-Corps' resources. As an interesting aside, note that as Lauren unbuckles to space the mundane, her harness is pulled up to suggest 0G. Now, Lauren's behaviour towards Bester here is a little curious, because she's very forward with him, seemingly out of the blue. Maybe that's just a Psy-Corps perk of being senior, but it seems potentially abusive somehow if she feels that's expected of her. Maybe she's just trying to accelerate her career progression. Who knows? Just seems off somehow based on what we know of relationships elsewhere, although we know that the Corps does essentially arrange marriages for genetic breeding purposes. It's just that there's no suggestion of this being officially sanctioned. The whole premise of this episode seems a little odd in the sense that Bester takes two powerful but very raw recruits with him into what is clearly a potentially dangerous situation, even before they find Harris has multiple personalities. The irony is that at no point do they ever need to use their abilities to bring him in. It's a knife and PPGs that determine the outcome of events. At this point, Bester ought to know better than to bring partners onto the station. He tends to be the only one to walk away. Think Mind War in Season 1. But he doesn't get away unscathed this time. Actually interesting that he tries to protect Lauren over himself. He doesn't generally come across as the self-sacrificial type. He is clearly genuinely out to protect his fellow telepaths any way he can, even the fallen ones. This, of course, is at the core of what he wants, to protect his own people, mundanes be damned. At no point is this clearer than when the mundane is simply dumped with no ceremony into hyperspace. They're really not on his or presumably any Psychop's radar. They're just to be held at bay until the Corps is ready to take their place. Some other interesting points. This is possibly the first time we've ever seen Bester dressed down. Not sure why the Academy needs quite so many signs reminding telepaths that they need to be what they need to be doing, like obey. Maybe a little too obvious? We see Lauren seeing a psi battle using her mind's eye. It had a strangely anime-esque feel to it, but as Bester notes later, they can't record psi effects visually, so I suppose what we see has to suffer from the same difficulty. The whole setup is quite curious when you consider that telepaths of all people ought to be able to discern when they're being brainwashed. It's effectively a cult, built around the perceived threat of mundanes, such that they feel they have to be able to police themselves, or the mundanes would do it for them. None of the other races seem to have an equivalent, so it may speak to human culture's fear of the different that the Psy-Corps had to be formed in the first place. It's also unclear to what extent the Shadows had long-term influence on the Corps, and what remnants of that might still be in play. All of these issues, of course, were reflected in Edgar's telepath virus plot and Byron's rebellion. As with the previous episode, we see CGI being used to establish more buildings and build atmosphere in this episode. We've never seen the Psy-Corps Academy in living quarters before. It feels like the effects have really come up a notch in establishing planetary surroundings. Franklin and Zack are the only two series regulars we see in this episode, which is very unusual. And I'm not even sure you could say they were A and B plots. It's basically a Bester-centric episode, which is no bad thing because he's such a fan, love to loathe him favourite. And this does give us a lot more detail behind his day-to-day life. His use of the mirror to try and reach out to Harris was very interesting, a far longer range version of his method for reaching out to Byron possibly, or maybe even a connection to what Harris was feeling when he was still local. Probably an interesting episode to look at on Usenet for commentary, but beware spoilers obviously. Speaking of which, I wanted to mention the Grey 17 podcast, which is just in season 1 at the moment. I'm not affiliated with it, but it takes a novel approach in having people new to the series watching the episodes and commenting, together with old hands, who then do a spoiler-laden review of the episode in the Beyond the Rim sections that's currently set out. What's nice is that the team doing it, who are old hands, are referencing sources like Usenet for JMS comments from the time, and generally have a lot of background info, having also looked at his Becoming Superman biography. They're quite long, but having not been into podcasts before now, it's a pleasant distraction on the resumed commutes or longer car journeys, so you might like to give it a listen and see what you think. As the old hands are of a certain age, you also get era-appropriate references to other shows, which is nice. So, under 10 episodes left for me here. Let's see where we land.